Hello and welcome to How Could We, a podcast by EIT Climate-KIC, where we dare to explore the power of possibility and innovation in the face of climate change. A podcast where we ask, how could we have gotten here? And how can we get ourselves out? I am Anne-Sophie Garrigou.
And I'm Stephanie Klotz, your co-host for this season. This season is based on conversations initiated by EIT Climate-KIC, where we invited a range of experts to get outside perspectives on the work that we're doing. And during these conversations, we noted some reoccurring themes.
Yes, and those are the themes that we're working on this podcast now. So in our first episode, we talked to Nera Misra about climate narrative. That was a really beautiful episode where Nera speaks about the power of art to create stories that are more inclusive and stories that bring hope and energy for action. Then in a second episode, we talked to Tony Noshin about crisis and confusion and about the opportunity that arises in the aftermath of a crisis, but the cost at which that comes in. And in this third episode, the theme for us is radical collaboration.
I'm so excited for this episode. Radical collaboration is really what the crisis demands. We all know, at least we think we know by now, that we can't solve this crisis alone. None of us as individuals, none of us as organizations can solve this alone. So the crisis demands that we, in order to go further and faster and fairly, we need to go together. So it's going to be a great conversation with one of the greats of radical collaboration.
Yes, so to answer some of the burning questions we have on radical collaboration, we invited Yanis Chrysostomidis. Yanis is the head of the Rios Partners London office, and he has over 20 years of professional experience in sustainability, in climate. And Yanis' work involves effective and radical collaboration, supporting change makers to help shift the root causes of societal challenges such as climate change.
Yeah, his work is super interesting because he helps bring together disparate groups of organizations, whether it's governments or corporations or civil society organizations. He's really worked on issues where you wouldn't think that people really want to collaborate with one another. So hearing about his experiences on really what it takes to get people from different ethnicities or with different ideas and different visions to cooperate on big, hairy challenges is going to be really interesting. And Rios, like Climate-KIC, uses a systems and innovation approach to help catalyze change. So it's great to hear from a like-minded organization.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing this interview. Let's get to it. Hi Yanis, welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here. So we're going to dig straight into it. You work at Rios Partner, which is an organization that works on systemic, collaborative and creative approaches to meet the challenges of our time. It's a lot of words. Can you tell us a little bit what radical collaboration means to you and maybe introduce us and our audience to the work that you're doing at Rios?
With pleasure. So my name is Yanis Chrysostomidis. My role in Rios Partners is I'm a principal and I'm head of our London office. I got into this work actually with over 20 years of experience working in the climate space. And I mean, the first 10 years or so, I worked from a technical capacity and standpoint in areas like climate change, energy transition, risk and resilience. And the last 10 years with Rios Partners that I've been part of, my work is mainly around collaboration, leadership, and process design. So a little bit about Rios Partners. This is a global yet small organization, and we're deeply invested in solving complex problems through the lens of radical collaboration. Our work is all about pursuing speed, scale, and justice in tackling issues like the climate crisis and other complex problems that no single entity can address in isolation. We're working in collaboration with multiple partners that cannot solve a particular problem alone. And we're well known for a few methodologies that we've developed over the years. So one of them is transformative scenario planning, social labs is another, and radical collaboration is part of our toolkit. We've recently actually published a guidebook, really kind of highlighting 7 moves that leaders and organizations can do to act in a radically collaborative way.
Yanis, we're especially excited to have you on the podcast today because you are a member of a collaborative that we're working on together between EIT, Climate-KIC, and Rio's partner, and that's the Systemic Climate Action Collaborative. Can you tell us just a little bit about the collaborative and what you think makes this kind of collaboration between organizations that would normally be competitors? What makes this really special?
So the Systemic Climate Action Collaborative is an initiative that Climate-KIC actually has been spearheading, working with other partners like ourselves. And so it's unique in that, as I said, that traditional players who would not work together come together in attempting to collaborate. And one of the first practices that we think is radically collaborative is playing your role in a radical collaboration initiative. So playing your role really means to find out where you can best contribute and then decide in a collaborative capacity how each of us will play our specific roles together. So many collaborations actually start by delineating everything, kind of trying to make agreements before commitments take place. Then the collaboration starts. But I think where we are doing things a little differently this time, or we're attempting to, it's an experiment, is we're actually starting on the principle of good faith and trust that we're building slowly by doing small things together and start collaborating in the small things. And so we're trying to play our role in the system and identify where each of us can really add from their heads and their hearts the best they can actually in the collaborative process. That's a really interesting collaboration that we're engaging now with that first principle in mind.
We can say today that everyone or almost everyone working in the climate movement know that to enact meaningful change, we have to engage with people with different mindsets, experiences, goals, because what needs to be done is going to have a huge impact on people, on communities, on industries. And your work, precisely at Rio's Partners, depends on bringing together people with those different perspectives, even those, I guess, who are resistant to change, right? So can you tell us a little bit about your approach to doing this, the challenges, the opportunities?
Some of the principles of radical collaboration that we've outlined in a guidebook. First of all is learning to play your role in the change process you want to be part of. And what does that mean is to really understand what your role is about and what the role of the system is about and what other actors are trying to achieve, and really try to play to your strengths and collaborate where there's actual need. The second move is to find the necessary allies for you to be able to move forward in the direction that you'd like to move. You don't need to get everyone on board, but there's certain necessary allies that by means of complementarity or ability to work well together, you can find and work with. The third thing that I think we're also trying to do in the collaborative is build our collective power. The obvious saying here is that the sum of the parts are less than the whole, right? And so building that collective power is really key in creating radically collaborative organizations and constellations of collaboration. In that process, inevitably, there will be differences. And so being very clear on having a process that is working through those differences is paramount and essential, because there will be problems on the way. The fifth move is to discover the simplest and most direct ways forward together. And at the same time, as one is doing it, share stories, share hopeful stories. And the reason for that is people learn and act through stories and storytelling, and shaping those narratives and sharing those hopeful stories is really important in gaining energy and being able to continue the work. And last but not least, to really nourish all of this hard work, because radical collaboration is really, really hard work. And if there's another way that you can actually get where you need to go without radically collaborating, maybe you do that. But for problems that require radical collaboration, they're very resource and time intensive. So what's needed there is to really also care for ourselves and for the collaborative process itself. So caring is the last, but also the essential part, because as I said, the radical collaboration practice is something that takes resources and time and efforts.
Can we ask you, Yanis, is there a couple of examples that you can talk to us about that is in this document you just mentioned? I think it's interesting for the audience to have just a couple of examples of what this radical collaboration means in practice.
We're not advocating that one should go for radical diversity, which is how we call the engagement with very different worldviews. We think that one should do that when that is really needed. There's also an approach that we call the coalition of the willing, which is a more pragmatic approach. And if you can go where you need to go, without taking everyone with you, because it's like I don't know, if it's like a small technical challenge that you're trying to solve that is requiring certain teams in an organization or a sector to work towards an outcome, you just go with whoever is interested, right? So that's also okay. But some of the challenges that we're trying to work on, they really require a radical diversity type of setup. That's why we're advocating for this, to caveat a little bit. It's not for the diversity for the sake of diversity, right? It is because it is needed. In that situation, encompassing these various perspectives, it is pivotal. For example, I've personally worked on over many years is actually Syria. And we run an innovation process in Syria with our partners, the Hague Institute for Innovation of Law. We managed to get into a room multiple times, people that were normally in the opposing sides of the political spectrum. And that was 4 or 5 years ago when things were really tough. I mean, they're still tough, but in the midst of the civil war almost. And so we brought them together with something holding them together. And the glue there was their belief in justice. And I'm not talking about justice and who's right and who's wrong, but I'm talking about justice with a small j. Justice as, can we get documents for people? Can we minimize violence against women? Can we ensure that children have birth certificates? There are these kind of small justice problems that exist and really, really deteriorate the quality of life of many, many people. I mean, of course, this doesn't relate to climate, but it is an example of how normally people who have, I guess, less things to fight about than we sometimes have in the climate space, came together and they worked together on an issue such as justice to find solutions. It's not easy, as I said, and creating dialogues that bridge diverse standpoints takes time, takes energy, but we must engage with those contrasting mindsets, particularly in a problem like climate change, because we have regions where, for example, oil is deeply embedded in the cultural identity, gas, it's part of life, it's part of the ID, it's part of the DNA. It's actually beyond the economic incentives to an extent. It's a way of life, right? So actually, I would add another nuance to your point around different mindset is engaging with culture is really, really important. Understanding culture, being curious about culture. I mean, those kinds of exchanges can really shape maybe even a small common culture at times that can actually shift things forward.
I wonder, in the case of Syria, what was key to finding the common ground? What do you think really drove this collaboration forward?
In my experience or in my perspective, because I think that maybe others in that process have a different view, but I think what really helped the group to work together is to coalesce around common, shared, non-threatening visions of justice. And who can argue against a world where people have personal documents? As simple as that. Who can argue against a world where there's less child abuse or there's less violence? Those are aspirations that people across that political spectrum and sectors shared. I guess where they differed was how to get there and the tactics and who's in power. I mean, sometimes it is about power. So actually, in our processes, we are very, very intentional about power. We don't shy away from it. We name it because the power that's not named, it creeps under the surface. And then that's even more difficult to work with. So actually, power is a big one, and not just for the Syria process, for any process.
Power always feels like a little bit of a taboo subject when you're working in collaboration in teams within an organization or with other organizations. How do you recommend one tackles the subject of power?
And it is a tough, taboo kind of subject. I used to think that power is a taboo when you have it, but also power is a taboo when you think you don't have it. But actually, one thing that helps is to recognize that everyone has power, even a person who can be in a relatively sort of lower rank, positional rank, for example, can have huge amounts of power in a process. They can abstract the process in different ways. So actually recognizing that everyone has power is really key. And also there's different levels of and types of power, like there's the positional power or the economic power, socioeconomic power. But then there's other forms of power like spiritual power or psychological power. In fact, many abuses can happen in the world because there's a person with huge positional power in a role, and that person has very little psychological power, and so they almost question why they're in that role, and they maybe need to bully others to feel that they're actually kind of playing their part in the power game. But I think that's a key element to recognize, that power doesn't stay with any individual, and there's different forms of it, and it moves around. So I think naming it is one. We also have different ways that we work with power when that's a big topic in a collaboration. One of our very friendly, good associates actually has a method called role hacking, where you kind of like hack the role, whether we're playing in a process, to try to empathize a little bit with how it is to be in a perceived high rank or high power role versus a lower rank, lower positional power role. So sort of little process tools that we use, but I think you're right that it is a taboo, Stephanie. And sometimes also it's a taboo for people having power to own their power. Like personally, I've noticed how I'm mostly triggered when a person comes in and has all the power, most of the power, but then they want to make you feel that it's your decision that they're taking, or they almost like want to absolve the responsibility of decision making whilst they have all the power to make the decision. Those are little kind of power dynamics that people can also not own. So I think power is an interesting one.
I was wondering if you could share strategies that can be used to engage and mobilize individuals to be part of the radical collaboration movement on climate change. And in our chats before the recording, you mentioned a term that we really liked, that was network weavers. And you explained that these hidden actors play a crucial role in making collective action possible. Can you please talk a little bit about that? How to find those people, how to include them?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe this question really ties well with the power question, because these network weavers may be people that on the face of it don't have a huge amount of power. They're not your CEO, they're not your minister, but they have something that others don't have. They have an agility to act, sometimes independently, without kind of the institutional constraints. They know people across different parts of the system, so they can connect seeming parts of the system that don't normally connect. And so they can integrate efforts within an action, within a movement. As I said, they're not visible, but they knit together these sort of networks and can facilitate coordination. I don't think there's like a very kind of intentional way that one goes about hunting for those people. But our approach here is to really convene a microcosm of the system that we're trying to work in. And so as part of that convening, those actors will take part. And these are maybe sometimes they're the unlikely participants, people that you're like, and they do something sometimes in a process. They can really change something qualitatively by bringing something that's not expected. And then they can go out and do a lot more things, have more freedom to act or connect than many of us do, because they can actually move this kind of agile and unforeseen ways.
Do you have any examples where network weavers were really crucial for the process?
Yes, network weaving is a core design feature of our processes, where we convene this sort of very diverse group of people to work on a problem, and through creating deep trusting relationships across these silos and groups. That level of trust is normally within the group, but not across them. But then through that process, then they start connecting. And so an example of such a process, recent one, is a collaboration that we forged between Greek and Turkish Cypriots in Cyprus. Through that process of developing some scenarios on the future of Cyprus, I wasn't involved because I'm Greek origins. There's a potential sort of conflict of me facilitating that process. But I know that in that process, new networks have been weaved across institutional divides. So, some of the more institutional people couldn't really actually weave that deeply with each other and through each other. But then through a couple of people that I have in mind, collaborations have been weaved and formed through that way. Another angle of this is, sometimes ourselves as Rios can be network weavers across our own projects, where we can connect our work on forests between Australia and Brazil, and the work that we're doing in Australia can be a little different to what we're doing in Brazil. But then actually connecting those bodies of work together, you can have a new angle to the problem. Or our work on gender-based violence. I did some work on that in Syria, and then we also did some work in South Africa. We're still doing some work in South Africa. Actually, now we're doing it with a focus on mining. There's really interesting lessons to be learned when you're comparing the violence against women in Syria versus what's happened in South Africa in the past in the lab that I'm thinking about, and also what's happening in the mining sector. Same topic, but different problematics. And then, so the network weaving can also happen in that way.
So one of the threads that has run throughout the podcast is the need to bring different types of stakeholders together to drive climate innovation. Can you talk a bit more about your approach towards building coalitions with different kinds of people?
Yeah, with pleasure. So I think it's about building these diverse partnerships, right? And the diversity is not only sort of horizontal, but it could also be across generations. I also want to throw that angle as well, that the intergenerational and inter-religious aspect. These are elements that maybe in the past have been overlooked, but I think more and more people actually are focusing on those. I mean, an example of the intergenerational partnership element, this is part of the design of every process where, as I said, you're creating a microcosm, so you're going to have younger people and older people in a room. You're trying to develop that intergenerational partnership approach, but we've also designed processes with that at the center. So one example of that kind of work is the Drenthe Lab that some of my colleagues in the Netherlands recently did. You know, this is about merging the wisdom of experienced campaigners with this sort of vibrant, innovative energy of the youth, but also linking with decision makers and people who have also another type of wisdom that comes with years. So the Drenthe Lab was how to harness the knowledge, wisdom, and innovation power of multiple generations to radically accelerate the energy transition in the province of Drenthe. And that's, I think, a province in the northeast and Netherlands. But what was at the heart of it, and bringing leaders across all ages to tap into this sort of intergenerational wisdom was what we did there.
You mentioned in our discussion before the work you did on insurance in Mongolia, and we thought that was a really good example to bring here. Could you talk a little bit about this?
I had the pleasure to lead an inclusive insurance innovation lab in Mongolia, amongst other countries. We've been doing this work for over 8 years now with the Access to Insurance initiative. I was really amazed about some cultural nuances that the Mongolian people brought into the lab. The two nuances that I want to bring forward, and one thing that amazed me is the maybe somewhat different perception of risk that nomadic people have. You know, many in Mongolia are nomadic people, so when they move around, they have a vast country, and they used to move around with livestock, right? The work that we did there was around how to improve access to insurance for people who normally wouldn't, particularly also climate insurance, right? And so how do you actually even start to do that when someone has been a master, an excellent risk mitigator? Because if you think about it, you're trying to prevent risk, you're trying to mitigate risk, you're not actually managing risk after it has materialized. So what we were faced with there, because we dug deeper and deeper into the culture, it is actually, to an extent, it is a perception of risk and how do you deal with risk. And I think that a dominant worldview there is that risk should not materialize to begin with. When we talk about climate, like transferring risk to climate insurance, then that's a proposition that's difficult for people to actually even entertain as a possibility. Now, next to that as well, we engaged a lot with people who might be facing extreme weather or other types of risks. And the way they've dealt with risk is going to Buddhist monasteries, monks reading prayers to, again, completely avoid the risk happening. And I visited one of these monasteries, and I was amazed to see how there was a big menu of events. You know, you'd go into the counter and you'll pay for the appropriate level of risk prevention, and then someone would read the prayer in a monastery, and that gives a peace of mind for people. And I think there's much usefulness in doing that because it actually offers some consolation. People go and sleep well, and you know, I don't profess to know that there's any supernatural element to this, but for sure there is a utility because people feel good about this. But also the monks don't feel that insurance is a competitor. So what we did in the second innovation lab is we invited the Buddhist Rinpoche of Mongolia, who joined us for the process, and it was a delightful human being. He was changing the quality of the conversations in the room. I mean, just that simple made a difference in our process. But then we started thinking about whether they could play a role in supporting insurance, because they also realized that there's a role for that as well. And they care for people, and they want to make sure that people are taken care of when the event actually happens. I think just the ability to actually work with that part of religion in Mongolia and leverage that also trust that they have in society made a huge difference in the innovations that eventually were developed. And there was a crazy idea to try and sell insurance to the Buddhist monasteries. That didn't actually materialize in the end, but actually did give a few fresh ideas both to the Buddhists and also to the insurance sector. For me, that was a life-changing sort of experience in how I see maybe reality even. You know, it's actually going deep into the source of each of our realities and seeing how our realities are different and why certain people behave a certain way and some others behave in a different way.
We've come off the back of a first episode where we talked about climate change narratives, and you talked a little bit about storytelling at the beginning and about the importance of storytelling in collaborative processes. But I just wanted to ask you, do you think that climate change and the climate crisis is a different kind of problem compared to other societal issues that requires us to think about it in a slightly different way and maybe apply narratives in a different way?
Thanks for asking that question, Stephanie. Indeed, it does play a very differently in people's psychologies and mindsets. I think it's a distinct challenge. One, it's an existential threat, but two, the enemy is not tangible as an army or as the other. We tend to have the psychological process of othering. We other other people, and then we have an enemy, and then we marshal resources to fight the other. So unlike conflicts of the past where adversaries were clear, the climate crisis really stems from our collective human activities, right? So how do we shift our narratives then towards collaboration and understanding that the enemy actually, in this case, may be us, or our actions or our inactions? And I think the existential threat here is that the resources that we need to marshal to overcome this challenge are probably bigger than that we've seen historically in, being marshaled in times of war. Think about also what technological innovations were developed in times of work, like I'm thinking World War II and, all of the many technologies that we use now and we've commercialized came up then in 7-year span. But that's the kind of effort we need. And that was the effort where people just went by with a bare minimum, really. We lost lives, and that was the kind of level of effort. If I'm honest, I don't see how we're going to let go and get there without acknowledging that this is as existential as that, and the response needs to be as energetic and singular as that one was. Maybe a better inspiration is to look at if we have records and see how we convinced people that Earth is round and it goes around the sun and not the other way around. And we know what did Copernicus and Galileo did, and how did they convince that society? What happened there? I don't know. There's probably some historian who's done that research. Maybe we can ask them.
So if you had to summarize the main lessons that you personally have learned from all those interesting collaborative initiatives and that can inform the design and implementation of future projects, what would it be?
I think the path towards addressing the climate crisis must be paved with radical collaboration. And for that to happen, we need to recognize hidden actors, also network weavers that I've talked about, engaging varied perspectives, and creating new narratives in an effective way. We don't need to sort of single-handedly save the world here, but we must respect and understand our place within it and navigate towards our positive contributions collectively where we can. We can be sober about it, but still be passionate and effective about how we go.
Thank you for joining us. It's been really a pleasure to hear more about Rios Partner, and we're really, really happy that Climate-KIC is working with you on some projects.
Before we let you go, though, there's one thing that we ask all of our guests on How Could We podcast, and that is, what does a beautiful, just, and climate resilient future look like to you?
So to me, a just, beautiful, and climate resilient future is one where we honor and respect our interconnectedness with nature and with each other.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much again, Yanis, for everything.
Thank you for having me. It was really exciting to actually be able to share some of the thoughts that have been on my mind for some time now and, kind of verbalize it with you.
Thanks for being with us, Yanis, and we'll see you at COP28.
Bye.
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 All right, Stephanie, what an interesting interview. What interesting examples. Do you have anything to share already? What comes to mind?
I think Yanis' experiences of bringing people together are super interesting. And what I find really important from the things that he said was really to kind of highlight this aspect of radical collaboration is hard. It is hard work. It implies a lot of understanding and sharing of some sort of vision, which is not necessarily easy when you have a diverse set of people that are coming together. So finding the one element that brings people together is key, but also super hard. One of the things that he said that just kind of stuck in my mind is, you don't need to always do it. You don't need to collaborate in a radical way for every single program or every single problem. We tend to have this kind of notion that every problem needs a really diverse set of people to work on it. And sometimes there's technical problems that really don't need radical collaboration. But in this case, in our case, in the case of climate, you really do. And it's going to be hard. We don't have a choice. We need to do it, and it's going to be hard, and it's going to be sticky, and there's going to be all kinds of dynamics. And his experience on how to work through those dynamics is really important to listen to.
Yeah, I also really liked what he was saying about these network weavers, like those hidden actors that play a really important role in making collective action possible. I think that's kind of an obvious idea, but also something that we need to remind ourselves all the time, like people working in the climate. I mean, not even only people working in the climate space, but just when you're working on any complex issues, what are the hidden actors? Who are the people that have a role to play here? And sometimes those are community leaders that have a power of influence over other people that we might not think of reaching out to. So I really love that idea, and that's something that I'm gonna keep with me.
Yeah, exactly. It as you say, it seems so obvious because in every kind of human group, there's always the network weaver, right? There's always that friend that kind of glues everyone together. But the thing is, it's about human relationships at the end of the day, and that's what we kind of forget. Don't forget that we are hosting open dialogues every month, and we will have one on radical collaboration. We are happy to have you and to actually hear from you and discuss radical collaboration as a group. Also, we'll be at COP28. Come and visit us, come and see us. You can find all the panels that we will be a part of on our website, so go and check it out. Hope to see you there.
So thank you everyone again for listening. Thank you to Yanis for another inspirational conversation. That's it for the season. We hope you enjoyed this special episode. And yes, once again, please follow us on Spotify. Share the episodes with your friends, your colleagues, or anyone that you think might be interested in the topic. And you can also find us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Climate-KIC. That's KIC. This episode was produced by Barbara Mendes-George. See you next time.